Billie Eilish recently said this.
Eating meat is inherently wrong. Two things cannot coincide. You can eat meat, go for it. You can love animals, but you can't do both.
She is obviously getting a lot of hate for this take, and people are pointing out that she is a hypocrite for many reasons, but I think she actually has a good point in some ways, and I think most people use really bad arguments to criticize her for this. It seems like most people just try to point out that she is a hypocrite because she talks about eating the rich, all while she charges $500 for her concert tickets, and I think that's not the best argument because it basically just points out that hypocrisy shouldn't be allowed, which actually just backs up her point about how meat eaters who say they love animals are hypocritical. But I don't agree with her, and I will explain why. It's hard to explain, but I will try my best. The reason I don't fully agree with her is, like I said, hard for me to explain, because it would be much easier if I could just say she's wrong and move on, but I don't think she is wrong in the simple way people online want her to be wrong. I think she's saying something that is very important and most people ignore. I also think she's making a claim that sounds cleaner than human life actually is, because I do eat meat and I do love animals. I love animals more than almost anything. I love untouched nature, wild animals, the feeling of seeing something alive that does not care about you at all and is beautiful exactly because of that. I can watch a bird land on a fence and genuinely feel like I've been given a tiny gift by the universe, which sounds dramatic, but it's true. And still, I eat meat. I buy it in stores, I enjoy it, I benefit from a system I don't fully respect. So before I even criticize Billie's argument, I have to admit that I am already standing in the middle of the contradiction she's pointing at. That's what makes this whole thing difficult, because I'm not trying to defend myself as some morally perfect meat eater who has everything figured out. I'm against factory farming in principle, but I still buy meat from stores, and even when I choose brands I think are more ethical, I'm still participating in a system where animals are treated as products. I can say I care about animal welfare, and I do, but clearly that care has limits, because if it didn't, I'd probably be vegan already. That's not a comfortable thing to admit, but it's probably true. My dislike of factory farming does not outweigh my desire to eat meat, at least not enough to make me stop completely. And that makes me a hypocrite. I don't really have some genius defense against that. I'm not going to do that thing where people try to create a complicated moral loophole so they don't have to face the obvious. I know there is hypocrisy there, but the thing is, I also think Billie Eilish is probably a hypocrite too, and I don't mean that as some cheap gotcha point. I think the hypocrisy matters for a different reason. Billie has been a big voice on climate and environmental issues, which is good, but she is also a massive global celebrity who tours, travels, performs, lives a life with a level of wealth and movement most normal people will never experience. No matter how much she does for climate awareness, there is still an obvious tension there. And I could use her own logic back at her in a really aggressive way. I could say if you take jets, tour the world, live in huge houses and profit from an industry that uses a lot of resources, you don't care about the climate, you can care about the climate, or you can live that life, but you can't do both. And that would sound very similar to her meat argument, but I don't actually believe that. I think she can care about the climate while still living inconsistently with that care. I think she can be wrong in some parts and still genuine in others. I think human beings are almost never as clean as their moral arguments. That's where I think the conversation gets more interesting than just meat bad or meat good. Because if I allow myself to be inconsistent, I have to allow other people to be inconsistent too. I can't admit that I eat meat while being against factory farming, then turn around and say Billie's climate views don't count because she doesn't live perfectly. That would be too convenient. And this is where I think human nature messes with formal logic, because formal logic is clean and people are not. A philosopher can take two premises and arrive at a conclusion, and that can be useful, but real life doesn't always move like that. Real life is hunger, habit, pleasure, fear, love, guilt, money, convenience, social pressure, tiredness, and 1,000 other things all fighting for the steering wheel at the same time. You can genuinely believe something and still fail to live up to it. That does not automatically make the belief fake. It might make you weak or compromised or normal, depending on how generous you're feeling that day. Imagine someone who genuinely believes we might be living in a simulation. You can make an argument for it that is hard to disprove completely, and maybe for a while they really think about it. Maybe it scares them, maybe they feel like nothing is real. But then one day they fall in love, or get hungry, or laugh at something stupid, or get embarrassed in public, and for those few seconds the entire simulation theory disappears from their mind. Not because they disproved it, but because life is stronger than abstract thought. And I think morality works like that too. We can believe things deeply and still be pulled away from them by ordinary human desires. That doesn't make the belief meaningless, but it does make the person complicated. So when Billie says you can't love animals and eat meat, I understand the moral force behind it, but I think she's making human beings sound more logically consistent than they are. People hold rivaling feelings all the time. A parent can love their child and still be impatient with them. Someone can care about the planet and still buy things they don't need. A person can hate fast fashion and still order a cheap hoodie because they're broke or lazy or just want the hoodie. None of that makes the caring fake automatically. It shows that caring is not the same as total obedience to an idea. And maybe that sounds like an excuse because sometimes it is. People can definitely hide behind complexity to avoid changing. The honest answer is not that I have a perfect argument against veganism. I don't. A lot of vegan arguments are strong. Factory farming is horrible. The amount of suffering involved is hard to justify. I can't watch footage of animals being mistreated and go, yes, this seems fine and normal. It feels awful. It feels like something future humans might look back on and wonder how we tolerated it. And yet, after feeling that, I can still walk into a store later and buy meat. That fact alone says a lot about me and probably about most people. Not that we are evil, but that we are very good at separating knowledge from action when action would cost us something. The Old Man and the Sea is probably the best way I can explain why I don't think loving an animal and killing an animal are always total opposites. The story is basically about an old fisherman named Santiago who goes far out into the sea after a long period of bad luck, and he hooks this enormous marlin so powerful and impressive that catching it becomes less like a normal fishing trip and more like some kind of spiritual test. And as he fights the fish, he starts to respect it. He starts to feel a kind of friendship or brotherhood with it. He even questions whether he is worthy of eating it, which is such a strange and beautiful thing because he is the one trying to kill it and yet he still sees its dignity. The fish didn't choose the fight, it didn't sign up for some heroic battle. It was just living, swimming through the deep water until the old man's hook entered its life and changed everything. And still, the old man loves it. I don't think there's any doubt about that when you read it. He loves the fish he is trying to kill, and that sounds contradictory, but it feels true. Later, when sharks come and start eating the marlin after he has finally caught it, he fights them off with everything he has. He risks himself for this dead fish. By the end, the fish is basically destroyed, and somehow the story does not feel like a simple story about cruelty. It feels like love, struggle, hunger, pride, death, nature, and respect all tangled together in a way that would be ruined if you tried to reduce it to one clean moral sentence. That's the part of Billie's argument I struggle with. If Santiago says he loves the fish, I believe him. I don't think he is lying. I don't think his love is cancelled out because he kills it. I think his love exists inside a world where living things eat other living things, and that world is not gentle. A cheetah killing a zebra is not doing something morally wrong, at least not in the way a human can do something morally wrong. The zebra wants to live, the cheetah wants to live, and nature does not pause to make sure everyone gets a fair outcome. That is part of what makes nature both beautiful and terrifying. It is not a children's movie where every animal is secretly best friends. I can love that world without pretending it is kind. But then the obvious response is that I am not a cheetah. I don't need meat in the same way. I can survive without it. Most people in developed countries can live perfectly healthy lives without eating animals if they put in the effort. I can't hide completely behind nature because I'm not chasing a zebra on the savannah with my bare teeth. I'm standing in a supermarket choosing between packages under fluorescent lights. That is a very different scene, and it deserves a different moral standard. Still, I don't think the existence of choice automatically makes eating meat evil in every possible context. If I catch a fish myself, kill it quickly, cook it and eat it, I have a very hard time seeing that as morally the same as buying the cheapest meat from an industrial system where animals live miserable lives from birth to death. Both involve killing an animal, yes, but the conditions matter. The relationship to the animal matters, the suffering matters. And this is where I think vegan arguments are strongest because they usually focus less on some ancient human relationship with hunting or fishing and more on the actual systems most of us rely on now. Factory farming is not Santiago fighting the marlin. It is not a cheetah chasing a zebra. Factory farming can turn living beings into units of production, and that is where my stomach drops a bit because I know I benefit from that even if I say I dislike it. I can try to buy more ethical products, and I do think that matters, especially in countries with stricter animal welfare standards, But it doesn't erase the basic problem. An animal can still be born into a life designed entirely around my appetite. I don't have a funny line to soften that, it just is. The weird thing is that when people discuss this, they often jump straight to extremes. One side acts like eating meat makes you a monster who never loved an animal in your life, and the other side acts like caring about animal suffering makes you weak, annoying, or disconnected from reality. Both reactions feel too simple. I think a person can love animals and still eat meat, but I also think vegans are right to question how deep that love goes if it never changes your behavior at all. Maybe love does not require perfection, but it probably should require some kind of discomfort. If you say you love animals and the suffering behind your food never bothers you, then I would question what kind of love that is. But if it does bother you and you still fail to fully act on it, that feels less like proof that the love is fake and more like proof that people are conflicted. That might sound like I'm trying to let myself off the hook, and maybe I am, but I also think it's closer to how people actually work. We have moral emotions that are real, then habits that pull us another direction. We can be deeply moved by an animal's suffering, then later make a choice that indirectly supports it. That contradiction is not impressive or noble, but it is common. And if we pretend it isn't, we end up arguing about imaginary people who always act according to their principles, instead of the real people who forget their principles the second they are tired, hungry, or slightly inconvenienced. Why is a dog a friend and a pig a sandwich? And honestly, that is a fair question. Pigs are intelligent, cows can be affectionate, chickens have more going on than people give them credit for. A lot of the line is cultural, not objective. If you grow up with one animal in your house and another animal on your plate, you learn to feel differently about them. That doesn't mean the difference is morally meaningless, but it does mean we should be honest about how much of it comes from habit. At the same time, every living thing draws lines somewhere. Vegans draw the line at animals, or at least at sentient animals. Most people draw it at humans and pets first, then certain animals, then others much lower down. Plants are alive too, which makes the whole thing more confusing than people sometimes admit. I know the usual vegan response, and it's a strong one. Plants do not have nervous systems like animals do, they don't experience pain in the same way, at least as far as we understand it. But there is still an interesting philosophical problem there, because we don't fully know what consciousness is. We don't know exactly what it feels like to be any other living thing. We make judgments based on capacity, nervous systems, behavior, pain responses, intelligence, and that is probably the best we can do. But it does mean the line is not as simple as living things matter, because everyone eats living things. The real question is which kinds of experience deserve moral protection, and why. A pig's pain does not become irrelevant because it's a pig. A cow's fear does not become fake because it doesn't speak English or pay taxes. But even there things get complicated, because equal consideration does not always mean identical rights. A dog should not be tortured because it can suffer, but a dog should not vote because voting requires a kind of reasoning and political understanding that dogs do not have. That sounds obvious, but it matters because moral value does not have to mean every being gets treated exactly the same. A baby has moral value, but it can't vote. A person in a coma has moral value, but they can't consent to things in the normal way. So when it comes to animals, the question is not whether they are exactly like humans, the question is what we owe them because of what they can experience. And I think we owe them much more than factory farming gives them. That's where I agree with Billie, probably more than I want to admit. But I still come back to the sentence, you can't love animals and eat meat, and I can't fully accept it. It leaves no room for the farmer who cares for the animals, the person who rescues dogs and still eats chicken, the hunter who respects the deer more than someone eating a burger without thinking about it at all. Maybe some people would say all of those examples are still morally wrong, and maybe they are in some way, but I don't think they prove love is absent. Love is not always the same as harmlessness. That sounds dangerous if you apply it badly, because people can use love to justify horrible things, so I want to be careful. I'm not saying love excuses cruelty, I'm saying human love often exists inside imperfect behavior. A person can love their country and criticize it. They can love their family and fail them. They can love animals and still participate in a system that harms animals. That doesn't make the harm disappear. It also doesn't automatically make the love fake. The contradiction remains. Maybe the most honest thing is to let it remain instead of trying to solve it too quickly. I think part of the reason Billie's statement got so much hate is that people don't like being morally cornered. When someone says you can't do both, they are not just making a claim, they are removing your comfortable middle ground. And most people live in the middle ground. Most people do not want to torture animals. Most people also do not want to give up meat. So when someone points at that contradiction directly, people get defensive. They mock the person, attack their lifestyle, bring up private jets or celebrity hypocrisy or expensive vegan food or whatever else. And sometimes those criticisms are fair, but often they are also a way to avoid the original discomfort. It's easier to call Billie annoying than to think about where your food came from. It's easier to find a flaw in the messenger than to ask whether the message has any truth in it. And I say that as someone who does not fully agree with her. I still think people should be allowed to criticize her argument, but I think a lot of the criticism misses the actual point. If your response is just animals taste good, then you haven't really answered anything. You've just admitted pleasure matters more to you than the animal's life. And maybe that's true. It's partly true for me, but at least say that honestly. Don't dress it up as some grand moral victory. The stronger criticism to me is not that Billie is hypocritical, because again, most people are. The stronger criticism is that her statement treats love as if it must always produce the cleanest possible behavior. And I don't think that is how love works. Love can be real and still limited. It can be deep and still compromised. It can be present and still fail to win against appetite, habit, culture, money, convenience, or whatever else. That doesn't mean we should celebrate the failure, it means we should understand it accurately. If someone says they love animals and they eat meat, I don't think the correct response is always no you don't. I don't know where the exact line is for every person, but I think love should probably create some kind of responsibility, otherwise it becomes too easy. I also think there is a difference between eating meat and supporting cruelty, even if in practice those things overlap more than meat eaters want to admit. If a person lives in a place where animals are raised well, killed as humanely as possible and used fully, I can understand that relationship with meat. It still involves death, but death is not automatically the same as cruelty. Nature is full of death. Human life has always involved death. The moral problem becomes much worse when the animal's entire life is misery. If I had to defend meat eating at all, it would probably be there. Not in the cheapest supermarket package, not in industrial farming, not in pretending animals are objects, but in a relationship where the animal's life matters before its death. My answer is probably that I value animal life, but not in the same way I value human life, and I accept some animal death for food because it feels connected to the reality of being an animal myself. That might not convince anyone, but it feels closer to my actual belief than pretending I think animals don't matter. Maybe that is the real difference between Billie and me. She seems to want the moral line to be clear. If you love animals, you don't eat them. I want to say the line is messier. If you love animals, you can still eat them, but you probably shouldn't be comfortable with all the ways that meat reaches your plate. It doesn't have the satisfying force of her statement. It doesn't fit as well in a quote, but it might describe more of real life. A lot of morality is not people choosing between good and evil like they're in a movie. It's people choosing between what they believe, what they can afford, what they enjoy, what they were raised with, what their body wants, what their friends do, what their culture considers normal, and what they have the emotional energy to think about on a random Tuesday. That doesn't mean morality disappears. It means moral change is harder than winning an argument. You can prove someone inconsistent and still not move them 1 inch because people don't live by logic alone. They live by routines, hunger, embarrassment, convenience, guilt, love, denial, and sometimes a random documentary they watched at 2 in the morning that made them cry for 10 minutes and then change absolutely nothing. And I guess that's why I don't want to treat Billie like she's stupid for saying this. I think she's making a serious point, even if I think the wording is too absolute. I like a lot of her music too, which is not really relevant philosophically, but it is relevant to how weird online reactions can be. I think the hardest part of this whole topic is that both sides can say something true. Billie can say eating meat harms animals, and if you love animals, you should not support that harm. That is true in a serious way. A meat eater can say love is more complicated than total moral consistency, and humans can care about things while still failing to live perfectly. That is also true. The problem is that those truths don't cancel each other out. They just sit there, and maybe the honest place to end up is uncomfortable. I can love animals and eat meat, but eating meat puts pressure on what I mean by love. It forces me to ask whether my love is active or mostly emotional. It makes me ask whether I care enough to change or only enough to feel bad. And maybe right now the answer is that I care enough to choose better when it's easy, but not enough to give it up completely. That is not heroic, it's not even especially defensible, it's just honest. And maybe honesty is the first useful thing before any moral improvement can happen, because if you start by pretending you're perfectly consistent, you never have to change anything. There's a version of this where I could end by saying everyone should just do their best, but that feels too easy, because doing your best often means doing whatever you already wanted and then putting a nice sentence on top of it. There's also a version where I could say Billie is completely right and we're all terrible people, but I don't believe that either. I think the truth is less satisfying. We are animals who can think about morality, which is a bizarre position to be in. We have instincts, cravings, traditions and bodies that want things, but we also have minds that can look at suffering and say, maybe this should matter. A cheetah does not lie awake wondering if the zebra had a family. We can. That makes us better in some ways and worse in others because we can understand the harm and still choose it. So no, I don't fully agree with Billie Eilish when she says you can't love animals and eat meat. I think you can. Maybe that makes me a hypocrite, maybe it makes me human, most likely it makes me both. But somewhere inside that contradiction, I think there is still a real love trying to figure out what it owes to the things it loves.